Welcome to another episode of Hometown History. I'm Jamie.
And I'm Dami.
Tonight's episode is called 3.1 William C. Goodridge, one of the coolest guys you'd ever want to learn about. We are in downtown New York at 123 East Philadelphia Street at the Goodridge Freedom Center. And we are so thankful that they opened up their doors to us on this lovely January evening. We're very thankful for that. It's amazing how people are generous.
It is.
All across the county,
I
just
know.
inviting us
York.
in. Yeah. So tonight's agenda.
Okay, so we're going to start with William Goodridge, who, is our main person that we're talking about tonight, and his rise from slavery. And then we're going to start talking about his family and their role in the Underground Railroad. And then, unfortunately, the tragedies that they had to go through as a family, and then an overview of the museum and the sculpture, because we're in the museum tonight.
At the end of tonight's episode, we're hoping that you walk away with these three takeaways. So William Goodridge, he was formerly enslaved, and he worked his way up to be one of the most prosperous businessmen at the time in York County. And so that's our first takeaway, that he, amid adversity, was able to triumph and kept on persevering. Number two, he and his wife, in fact, his entire family, supported the Underground Railroad. The house here is a station, so together with their sons and daughters, their neighbors, their business partners, they all work together to help freedom seekers. The second is that they continue the family legacy. Three of their sons continued into entrepreneurship and are known as being the pioneers of photography. And their daughter, when she moved out west to Minnesota, she also opened her own business and continued to help freedom seekers. A little bit about me. I'm a high school history teacher full-time. I write a local history blog called Wandering in York County. Jim McClure and I run a website called Witnessing York, and I recently launched an initiative to raise money for a city cemetery, trying to put a monument in downtown. It's called Project Penny Heaven. Look us up.
Yeah, go check it out, guys. And I'm Dami Miller, and I'm a Third Circuit Court of Appeals librarian by day, and I am a Civil War reenactor on the weekends, and I run the history page Preserving the History of Newburytown.
Any reenactments coming up?
No, but our first meeting is going to be in February to set our schedule for the upcoming season, so I'm excited.
Open to the public?
No.
Nope. Do not come. Do not show up.
I'm not going to give you the date or the time.
A lot of our resources came from these books right here. These are Scott Mingus's books. Dami's got a copy to show us as well. You can grab them at there you go. You grab them at the library, or he has them for sale on Amazon as well. And then go to Witnessing York. It's the website that Jim and I run. Our articles are all there. You can read more there. So to get us started, let's talk about the Goodridges.
Yeah, so we're going to start with how the family started. So Goodridge's mother was born on a plantation, and it was owned by Charles Carroll, and he was one of the signers of the Declaration of Independence.
Kind of cool.
So different legacy that he has there. And then when she was 20 years old, Carroll's heir sold her to a physician in Baltimore. And that's where William ended up being born in 1806. And he was actually of mixed race. And some believe that the C in his name might stand for Carroll. So his father could have been a white man. So then we have this mural to show you, and it shows him as a baby with his mother, and then you can see him as a child and as an adult. And then at 6 years old, William was taken to York, where he was indentured to a tanner, the Reverend William Dunn. And they had this agreement that Goodridge would remain there until he turned 21 years old. And then he would receive a suit of clothing and a Bible and be set free. So could you imagine just being turned out after a life of slavery and then indentured servitude, and all you have to your name is a Bible and a suit?
And what does that say as well? That you were given a suit and a Bible. Like, what's the symbolism there?
I think the Bible was just so important in American culture at the time. He could obviously read. They're not going to give him a book if he can't read.
Right.
And then maybe the suit was to say, we want you to look respectable in society.
Yeah, right. That if you want to make it, you have to respect yourself, respect others. Here's this moral compass called the Bible, but then also here's how you can stand out amongst your peers and show that you deserve respect as well back. Yeah. Yep. So in 1822, that is when Dunn released Goodridge. He was 16 years old, and he started off on his own business. I was thinking today, if I was 16 and emancipated, what business would I start? And honestly, probably cleaning houses. My mom took me to clean houses as a kid, and so that's what I would have known to do.
Right.
What would you have done?
I don't even know if I would think to start a business.
Yeah.
I'd probably think about being an employee first before I started my own business. But I mean, kudos to him to come from a life of slavery, to come from a life of indentured servitude and say, you know what, I'm free now and I'm going to make it on my own and I'm going to be my own boss.
Yeah,
That's pretty impressive.
Well said. So Goodridge learned how to be a barber. That was his occupation. He opened his own barber shop. And this also suggests that at the time, the fact that York Countyans could afford to pay someone else to cut their hair and shave shows that there's a growing middle class in our area, which is interesting. So even though he was born into slavery, he rose in alongside York's developing merchant class, which is pretty cool. The hairdressing business was a constant for Goodridge. Here is an ad from 1865 that promotes his shaving and hair clipping business. Services include sharpening of razors, scissors, surgical equipment, and the procurement of human hair, probably for wigs. I'll say I started cutting my husband's hair this summer. Part of it is to save money. Part of it is to not have to leave the house and go somewhere.
There you go.
And don't look at the back of his head. It looks good.
I haven't noticed any like patches. I haven't looked too hard, but
you're very kind.
Now I'm gonna reintroduce Goodridge's wife. So he ended up marrying Evalina Emily Wallace, and she was from Maryland. So evidently he traveled from York to Maryland at some point and was able to meet his wife. And they got married and they moved back to York. And they ended up having 7 kids. Ooh. So you're on 1.
Oh.
6 more, Jean.
Not 7.
So during the quarter century following their marriage, which was in 1827, William and Evalina Emily Goodridge established themselves in York as members of southeastern Pennsylvania's emerging African-American elite. And they were an effective team, and that's a quote from a historian. And in fact, Goodridge ran into financial problems after Emily passed away. And at least one historian has suggested that his financial troubles were because of Emily's passing and her not being there to help guide him through business. So, you know, she was like sort of a silent partner to him. And then they had a daughter, so Emily Goodridge Gray, and she moved to Old St. Anthony, Minnesota. And she was one of the first African Americans to do this, and she owned and operated a successful seamstress business. She's best known for initiating a movement to free an enslaved woman in 1860. And then a mob actually ended up destroying her home and her business because of this. But she, just like the rest of the Goodridges, persevered and she rebuilt and went back into business and she kept fighting. And she ended up writing a book, The Black Community, and a memoir. So, you know, it's just an amazing legacy that they have for fighting for freedom and entrepreneurship at the same time.
And they continued the legacy, So the Goodridges continued to grow their businesses in York, and here are just some of their businesses. They sold confectionery, wooden toys, rented stoves, marketed animal hides to tanneries, and distributed newspapers.
What didn't they do?
Right, I know. There are some ads that promote a line of stoves, fresh fruit, cheap jewelry, perfumes, hair dye. And then one of my favorites is there's one from 1832 that says there's a bathhouse in the rear of his shop. It said, "It is a perfectly private situations, and persons wishing to bathe can be supplied at a moment's warming with perfectly pure water, either cold or hot, as they may desire." This is before they had indoor plumbing.
That was a luxury back then. That was a luxury.
Can you imagine a Saturday night, like, hey, hon, let's go down to the bathhouse and get a hot shower.
Hey, you gotta do what you gotta do.
The things we take for granted.
Right?
He was one of only 3 free black men in York County to own bondsmen at the time. And he may have bought them for their freedom or to allow them to purchase their own freedom at a reduced price. But he was most famous for the Center Square.
Yeah, so Center Hall, and it's an impressive 5-story emporium on the northwest corner of Center Square, which for a brief period was the tallest building in York County. So it was actually 5 stories tall, and that was considered a skyscraper at the time, which is kind of funny looking back now that was a skyscraper.
Right.
But I mean, for York, that was a big building.
What will we be saying in another 50 years? You know?
I know. I mean, that's crazy. So the Goodridge Emporium houses his barber shop, his newspaper business, and other retail shops. But then another businessman named John Hartman couldn't let that stand, and he built a 6-story structure with the reported vow that no black man should own the highest building in town. But George Prow called Goodridge a man of tact, intelligence, and aptitude combined with energy and perseverance.
So this building is still standing, the Hartman building. The Goodridge building, unfortunately, is no longer standing. You can't see that today.
But you can imagine it.
Yeah. Next thing we want to talk about is the Underground Railroad.
Yeah.
So the Goodridges established a strong working relationship with their business partners that they also use to help freedom seekers on their way out of bondage.
Right.
It made me think that with William Goodridge, if he was from the age of 16 wanting to start his own businesses, and then he also coincided that with creating stations along the Underground Railroad in York County, which came first?
Right.
Was it, do I want to help freedom seekers? What businesses can I use to do that? Or how can I, maybe they were in tandem together.
Yeah, maybe it started at the same time, and maybe he always just had that desire to help other people have the freedom that he had.
That vision is amazing.
I know. Well, I mean, he was ahead of his time, honestly.
Yeah.
So it wouldn't surprise me if he was able to come up with all of that at 16 years
Yeah.
old.
And he wasn't the only one. If you look at a lot of the Scott Mingus's book, there are tons of other conductors in here. There were also pioneers and visionaries. We're just highlighting one tonight and promoting this great Freedom Center for you to come down and check out.
Yeah.
So in the 1840s, William Goodridge bought, what he chose to do is more buildings, so real estate, acquiring several properties in York. He also, and this is, I thought, very creative, he purchased a railroad. And that railroad transported freight from York to Philadelphia, which is known to be one of the tracks of the Underground Railroad.
What an amazing cover. You buy a railroad car for
Right,
your
yeah.
Underground Railroad.
Yep. So here it gives you an idea of what it looked like as far as slavery below us, below the Mason-Dixon line. So there were a large number of enslaved people in Northern Virginia and Maryland. And in 1860, you can see that 29.6% of Montgomery County's population was enslaved. That's 1 in 4 people.
That's a lot.
Blows my mind. It was 21.5% in Howard County census were enslaved. And again, it almost looks like there's this triangle pointing up towards Pennsylvania. Where you can see people. So we weren't too far, and that is why Pennsylvania is known for the Underground Railroad.
And conductors operated in all 3 corners of the triangle-shaped York County, and when freedom seekers arrived in York County, they had the option to cross the Susquehanna and keep going to friendlier and friendlier Underground Railroad stops as they headed toward Philly, and then they'd go to New York and then Canada. Or they had the option they could go due north through York County and then through the sparsely populated northern central Pennsylvania for the safety of Canada. And when you look at the operators, there was 25 or so conductors. Profiled in Mingus's book, working on the Underground Railroad was actually a family affair. So there was children involved as well. There was white families, black families, Quakers, Scott-Irish families, and Germans. And in Newburytown, which is where we're from and where we started hometown history, there was the Baptist family, and they were a free black family that were conductors on the Underground Railroad.
And they owned a farm and property, which is very unique for the 1800s for a black couple. You can watch more. This is our first ever hometown history
We were
video.
just babies. Oh my goodness, almost 2 years ago.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah, so go and watch that first video about the Baptist family. Okay. So the Goodridges hid freedom seekers, like we said, in this very house that we're in right now.
Yes.
Downstairs, there is this really neat plexiglass covered area that you can see their cellar that was filled with straw where freedom seekers would have hid. And we kind of are just brushing over how serious this was, that there were people who were risking their lives to help others when the Fugitive Slave Act made it a crime. I mean, you could lose your property, you could be fined for this, and especially if you're a black couple, there's a lot of other threats that come along with this.
Sure, you were risking your life, honestly.
And the Goodridges became known then, so slave catchers began closely watching this home.
That's so scary.
On East Philadelphia Street. Now, they were never caught, which is good.
Yes, thank goodness.
Same with the railroad that they had. Their operation grew to 13 cars. And then, as Dami said, he used that to transport freight, but then also his human cargo. Now, he didn't always use it. Sometimes he sent people by foot or by wagon, but it was a resource to have.
Yeah, I mean, what an amazing cover. It's like under your nose. You'd never guess.
Future movie?
Maybe?
I think Jim wrote an article about that. This could be a movie. Hollywood, here you come.
I'll act in it. So Goodridge had a ton of helpers along the Underground Railroad, and one of them was Black Isaac Brooks, who hid people in his cellar here in York, and then he would take them to Columbia. According to the Lancaster Daily Evening Express in 1870, Goodridge usually sent word a day in advance when freight might be expected in Columbia. And then his initial notice usually went to Mr. McCulley, the railroad dispatcher in Columbia, who was true as steel to the slave. McCulley relayed the news to the local Underground Railroad operatives. So, you know, it was a whole network happening, and it wasn't just here in York, it was in Columbia, it was across the river throughout Pennsylvania. So I think that's amazing. So, you know, evading criminal charges required years of secrecy, and you didn't know who you could trust, you didn't know who was pretending to be a part of the Underground Railroad to catch you. I mean, I couldn't imagine the paranoia that goes along with that, and not knowing who your real friends are.
Right, who to trust. I cannot imagine the constant fear. I mean, I know when I was a kid, and there was one time, so my mom's here. There was one time there was a pot in the basement, and I broke it, and I didn't tell her, and I still feel bad about that. But every time, it was like a flower pot, like a terracotta flower pot, and every time for the next year, she would say, "Jamie," and it was probably because I didn't hang my coat up or whatever.
You were gonna be busted.
I was like, "She's caught the pot." I think I even hit it, underneath.
You're a bad kid, Jamie.
I did it. Well, yeah, if that's all my son does, I'm not going to be worried about it. But I remember, though, just that fear of oh, I'm finally caught, I'm finally in trouble. Right. And what would have been like for the Goodridges.
I know.
Every time someone, again, knocks on your door or shows
up.
Or
just even walking out in the street. I mean, being an African-American family, they were sort of under scrutiny anyways.
Yeah, good point.
And then, having to also think about the fact that you were doing something illegal.
Yeah. Yeah, your lives are at risk. Well, one night there was one particular challenge that they had. So the story goes, and this hasn't been 100% verified, but during the Harper's Ferry raid with John Brown, when he led the slave revolt to try to, go against the federal arsenal down there, it was a catastrophe. It failed, did not work. I encourage you guys to go down to Harper's Ferry to learn more about this history. It's very interesting. But because it didn't work, the abolitionists were fleeing. They had to run away. Well, there was one, and here's a picture of him. His name was Osborne Perry Anderson, and he was a free black man, and he came to York on his journey to Canada. Many believe that the Goodridges hid him in the closet on the 3rd floor of their Center Hall building. And this is a publicized manhunt.
Right.
I mean, this was up and down the East Coast. People were looking for these fugitives that were running away from this revolt.
Yeah, this wasn't an unknown person that just slipped away at night. This was...
Right. Well-known.
Wanted posters.
Yes.
And, yeah.
The Goodridges left their son Wallace to keep him company. So just thinking about the tone of the time period and how their house was constantly being watched, and we're not, again, 100% sure if they took Anderson in or not, but that is how the story goes. We're looking, this is a great example of more research that needs to be done in our area, more local history for you to find out what actually happened.
Right. So, unfortunately, tragedy ended up striking the Goodridges in the 1850s and the 1860s. Goodridge's wife, Emily, died in 1852, and she's buried in York, but she doesn't even have a tombstone.
Yeah, we don't know where.
No, and that's so sad, and that sort of brings us to your project that you're working on. Do you want to talk about that for a second?
Yeah, well, just City Cemetery, there is Potter's Field with over 800 people, and there's one single marker, and that's it. And I live next door to it, and I didn't even know that it was a cemetery. And so we want to make sure that people's legacies are remembered, and for a lot of people that simply means a headstone where their names are written, because who deserves a written death? Just because you have money?
Right, yeah, and you look at William Goodridge, who has his own statue, and his poor wife doesn't even have a tombstone.
And it makes you wonder, they were prominent business people.
Right.
So why didn't she? What happened behind that? We don't know.
Sort of lost to history. But yeah, check out Project Penny Heaven online and donate to Jamie's cause.
Thanks.
You're welcome. So, like other Yorkers, Goodridge suffered a considerable financial loss after the Panic of 1857. We talked about that earlier, how, now his wife is gone and she might not be that steadying force for him in business anymore. And he was actually forced to sell several properties, including Center Hall. Small. P.A. Small, a miller, bought it for $3,200, and today that would be $110,000.
Probably not that much.
No, and not when you think about like how prominent of a space it was and how many businesses he housed in it. And some scholars suggest that Goodridge's work against slavery might have distracted his attention from his business matters, which, I mean, I believe that. And that actually led to his pre-war bankruptcy. So it was a really tough time for him.
Yep, they had a lot of challenges. And one thing we also want to highlight, though, is how 3 of their sons throughout this process were able to be successful with the photography business. And this was the very beginning of the art form. Some call the Goodridge family, Glenalvin and his 2 brothers, who are William and Wallace, one of America's first families in photography. They had studios here and in Michigan, and they lasted for 75 years. If you come and visit the William Goodridge Center here, you can see the new Glenalvin Goodridge photographic collection. The Smithsonian picked up some of these.
That's amazing.
Putting our name on the map here nationally.
Go York.
Glenalvin started the business just like his dad when he was 18, so a teenager, 2 years older than William, but still a teenager. And his first studio was in their building at Center Square Emporium, and then later their home where we're at right now. This was just the beginning of commercial photography, so York Countyans ate it up. They purchased them and even wore them as jewelry, like necklaces.
Oh, I would. I mean, it's like such a great invention.
Okay, when's your birthday again? Like when? You want a picture of like me? Like a locket?
I want a picture of the baby.
He could produce what's known as daguerreotypes, which were images that were placed on metal, but then also ambrotypes, which are images placed on glass. Despite this, we don't have very many photographs of the family, including William Goodridge himself. This right here, the one that's behind us and now in front of you, that is the only known photograph of William Goodridge.
They were busy taking pictures of everybody else.
Yeah.
They didn't have anyone to take their picture.
Gosh, I hope I'm not that kind of mom. Like, all right, get a picture, and then there's no pictures of me in anything.
That's
I'll just
exactly what
do a lot of
happened here.
Selfies holding. And actually, there's no known pictures of Glenalvin.
Right. And then for all of their successes, again, tragedy strikes. So Glenalvin was convicted of raping a white woman that allegedly occurred in the York photo studio. And he was sentenced to 5 years in Eastern State Penitentiary in Philadelphia, which is a very famous penitentiary. And William Goodridge started his month-long campaign to free his son from the penitentiary. The father successfully rallied bipartisan forces in York to appeal to the governor for a pardon. And this was no little accomplishment. I mean, in the middle of the decisive Civil War, and at points, you know, it really shows that the respect that the community had for the family, that they were willing to rally around them and believe him and his family. And William accompanied Glenalvin, then suffering from tuberculosis, north to Minneapolis. And as part of Glenalvin's pardon deal, he had to leave the state, so they went to Minneapolis. And many early photographers ended up dying at a young age from lung ailments. You're breathing in a lot of different chemicals that are involved in the photography process. And this was also when William decided to leave York as well. So the family's moving away from York after this.
Now, while they were still here, one of the many things that they did was opened up their house during Christmas time, which is about now, a couple weeks ago, because they would decorate their house with Christmas trees.
Beautiful.
Here's some pictures of what they would have looked like. Now, they did charge people. It was like a pay-to-view Christmas tree.
Well, they had to make money too. I get it. Those trees weren't cheap.
Heck yeah. Well, and it was kind of a novelty at the time.
Right.
Christmas trees weren't very common in York County, so this has been special. To the new sculpture that is just outside where we are right now.
Yeah, this is so cool. So this is the first sculpture of a black person or any person of color, and it's been installed in the summer here in York, and William Goodridge, and it's right outside the Goodridge Freedom Center, which is where we're at right now. And Gary Castile is the sculptor, and he's a nationally known artist, purposely positioned Goodridge on the ground level to invite engagement. So he wants you to sit there, he wants you to touch the sculpture, pose with him, and ask questions, because like we said before, there's little Easter eggs hidden in the sculpture. So you'll notice he has scissors in his pocket. There's a box right there that has bottles and
for his medicines for one of his dogs.
Right, yeah, and there's the foot on the trap door. So, you know, there's things that you want to learn about the sculpture. You can check out our short video that we actually filmed right before this. So that's going to be on Facebook and on YouTube. So go check that out to learn more about the sculpture.
So unfortunately, William Goodridge is going to pass away
Right.
during or right after the Civil War. The family moved to Minneapolis, Minnesota, and some of them moved to Michigan. And William went to live with his daughter, Emily, in Minneapolis. He died on New Year's Day in 1873, so it's almost the anniversary here.
Right.
He died of dropsy, which I had to look up. It is generalized swelling and was synonymous with heart failure.
Right.
So we want to highlight that he may have been born into slavery, but he got to see the 13th Amendment be passed, which abolished slavery. He also saw the 14th and then the 15th Amendment, which gave black men the right to vote. We don't know if he ever did cast his ballot,
Right.
but I'd like to think so. I'd like to
I would
picture
hope
him.
so. I would.
He is buried out west in a cemetery called the Pioneers and Soldiers Memorial Cemetery.
So even though that they moved out of York County, there were still some prominent Goodridges left in New York. And William's grandson, Glenn J. Goodridge, returned to York and took up the barbering business. So that's cool. You know, it's like a family business.
Yeah.
And he became a leader in the Faith Presbyterian Church, a black congregation. He ended up dying in the 1920s, and he's buried at Lebanon Cemetery with his mother, Rhonda C. Rayno. And his wife, Virginia, is actually buried there as well.
So now that we're wrapping up here, we want to revisit our takeaways.
Yes.
One is that William Goodridge is one of the coolest guys you'd ever want to learn from, and here's why. He rose from enslavement to one of the highest levels of business in York County. Number two, he and his wife, Emily, and their kids, they supported the Underground Railroad and helped freedom seekers. And then finally, his three sons were known for pioneers in the photography business, and his daughter as well out west with her seamstress business and also helping freedom seekers as well.
An amazing family all the way around.
Yeah.
So stay tuned for our next episode. We're going to be interviewing Kelly, and he's going to be here as William Goodridge. But then in February, on February 1st, we're going to have an episode about the 4 chaplains, and it's the 80th anniversary.
Yeah.
So lots of exciting things coming this year in hometown history.
That will be open to the public, and it's going to be a
Yes.
super cool location, which you're waiting to reveal. Wait another week, and we hope to see you all there. So save the dates for February 1st.
Can't wait, guys.
See ya.
Bye.